The desert had no mercy that night. Wind swept across the Sonoran plains, dragging dust over the bones of old cattle and the scattered remains of fences long forgotten. Caleb Morton walked through it like a man who had run out of choices. His horse had gone lame 3 days back, and the canteen at his hip held nothing but the echo of water. 40 years of life had left him with more scars than memories worth keeping. Once, he'd owned a ranch in Kansas good land, fertile, with a woman who smiled in the mornings and a boy who followed him like his shadow. But fever had taken them both before the ground froze, and Caleb had buried them with his own hands beneath a sycamore tree. Since that day, he hadn't stayed anywhere long. Now, under a bruised sky turning to night, he limped down a rocky slope, the ache in his left knee biting like iron. When he reached the bottom of the ravine, he saw it a faint orange flicker deep between the rocks. Fire. His first thought was danger. Fire meant people, and people in this land could mean raiders, soldiers, or worse. But the cold pressed hard into his bones, and hunger gnawed the last bit of pride he had. He moved closer, one hand resting on the worn handle of his revolver. The smell of smoke reached him first, then the soft murmur of voices, not men's, but women's, speaking in a language he hadn't heard since his scouting days. When he stepped from the shadows, the firelight revealed 5 women, Apache. Their long black hair caught the flame's glow, and their faces turned toward him all at once. He froze, lifting a hand in peace. "I don't want trouble," he rasped. "Just a place to sleep." The eldest stood slowly. Her name he'd learn later was Naira Strong Shoulders, eyes that didn't flinch. Beside her, a younger one gripped a knife, and another hid half her face behind a blanket. The fire threw their shadows tall against the canyon wall. After a long silence, Naira spoke in careful English. "Sit. There. Not close." Caleb obeyed, lowering himself at the edge of the warmth. The heat crawled into his skin, almost painful after the frozen wind. From the pot hanging above the coals came the smell of rabbit and beans. His stomach twisted, but he kept still. When a clay cup was passed toward him, he hesitated, then took it with both hands. The water tasted of earth, real, living earth. He set the cup down gently and nodded. "Thank you." No one answered. Only the fire did, spitting and crackling, as if it too was deciding whether he belonged. The fire burned low through the night, its light painting gold over the canyon walls. Caleb sat apart, coat pulled tight around his shoulders, listening to the wind whistle through cracks in the rock. Every now and then, he heard the soft murmur of voices, the 5 Apache women whispering in their own tongue. The rhythm was low, like prayer, or like fear trying to hide itself in words. He didn't understand much of what they said, but the sound of it tugged at something buried deep. He'd heard that same language years ago. In villages, the army rode through and left in ashes. He remembered standing still while others took what they wanted. He'd told himself it wasn't his place to stop them, that orders were orders. The lie still lived in him. The women had spread their bedding close together near the fire-patched hides, bits of woven cloth, scraps of what life used to be. He lay farther back, near the rocks. The cold seeped into his bad leg, stiff as iron, but he didn't dare move closer. Trust was too fragile to test. When he closed his eyes, he saw Kansas again, frost on the window, his wife coughing under the quilt, his little boy trying to keep the fire alive while fever took her breath. He had promised to bring a doctor, but the snow came too fast. By the time he returned, both were gone. He woke sometime before dawn to the crackle of the fire dying. The eldest woman, Naira, crouched near it, feeding in small twigs. Her face was calm, but her eyes flicked toward him more than once, sharp and watchful. Another, the quiet one with a long braid. Ahioka, he would later learn, was boiling water in a dented pot, her movements steady, practiced. Caleb sat up slowly. His coat had done little to keep the chill away. The youngest girl, Tiva, noticed and turned her face quickly, as if caught staring. She couldn't have been older than 20. The others carried themselves like women who had lived too much too soon. When Ahioka finished boiling the water, she poured a small clay cup and passed it toward him without a word. Caleb accepted it with both hands. The steam touched his face, soft as breath. He drank slowly, feeling it spread warmth down his throat. "Gracias," he murmured, the word slipping out of habit from long rides with Mexican traders. Ahioka tilted her head, but didn't reply. They ate in silence after that, a few scraps of bread, the last of the stew. Caleb tried not to stare, but when one of them reached forward to turn the meat, the neckline of her worn dress slipped low, revealing bronze skin in the firelight. He looked away at once, ashamed of the reflex. He wasn't that kind of man. Not anymore. When dawn finally broke, pale and cold, the canyon felt different. The night had not killed him, nor had they. That alone was a kind of mercy. Caleb rose stiffly, his knee aching, and nodded once toward the women. "Thank you for the fire," he said. Nara's voice came quiet but firm. "You want more fire?" He frowned. "I beg your pardon?" She handed him the axe that leaned against a rock. "Then you cut wood." And just like that, his second day among them had begun. Caleb took the axe without a word. The handle was cracked, wrapped in strips of rawhide to keep it together, but the blade still held an edge. He ran a thumb across it, then looked toward the canyon's edge where a few dead mesquite trees waited under the morning sunday. His leg ached as he limped forward. Each step pressed into the dirt with the weight of years' grief, guilt, and the cold hunger of survival. Behind him, the 5 women watched in silence. He could feel their eyes like the heat of the fire, testing him, measuring whether he was the kind of man who would take or the kind who would earn. He set the first log upright and swung. The pain shot up his knee, sharp as lightning. He bit down hard, said nothing, and swung again. The crack of splitting wood echoed through the hollow canyon, bouncing between the red stone walls. When he carried the first armful back, sweat ran down his neck, despite the cold. The eldest, Naira, nodded slightly, not praise, but acknowledgement. The second woman, Sahana, who had been stirring a pot near the fire, poured a ladle of water into a clay cup and pushed it toward him. Caleb hesitated, then accepted. "Work first," she said with her thick accent. "Then eat." He gave a short nod. Fair enough. All morning he worked. The sun climbed higher, warming the canyon. He split log after log until his arms trembled. When he stopped to rest, he saw the youngest, Tiva, watching him from behind a pile of hides. She quickly looked away, pretending to fix a tear in her skirt. Ahioka, the quiet one, kept the stew simmering, adding herbs that filled the air with a strange, bittersweet scent. The fifth woman, Lozan, sharpened knives on a stone, her gaze flicking up to him now and then, her expression unreadable. When the last of the deadwood was stacked high, Caleb straightened, breathing hard. His shirt clung to his back, dust streaked across his face. He looked at the pile, then at them. "That enough to pay for fire?" he asked. Naira met his eyes. "For today." Caleb almost smiled. It had been a long time since a day's work had earned him anything more than silence or a reason to keep living. By late afternoon, the canyon had gone quiet again. The air shimmered with heat rising from the stones, and the smell of stew drifted through the hollow. Caleb sat near the fire, his hands rough and blistered from the axe handle. The 5 women worked nearby, mending hides, grinding corn, braiding rope, their movements steady and practiced, like they had done this every day of their lives. He hadn't planned to stay another night, but when Naira handed him a wooden bowl of beans and meat, he didn't refuse. Hunger had a way of humbling a man. They ate in silence at first. Then Lozan, the one with calm eyes and a scar down her cheek, asked suddenly, "You soldier?" Caleb froze. "Was," he answered. "Blue coat?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Scout. Not anymore." The women exchanged glances, quiet, sharp, heavy with meaning. The youngest, Tiva, lowered her eyes, while Sahana's jaw tightened. It was Ahioka who spoke next, her voice soft but clear. "You ride when they burn our villages?" Caleb's throat tightened. The stew in his bowl had turned to ash. "I was there," he said finally. "I didn't pull the trigger, but I didn't stop them either." The words hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. The fire cracked, and the sound echoed through the canyon. After a long while, Naira broke the silence. "Then why you here?" He stared into the flames. "Because I buried my wife and son with my own hands. Because I had nowhere left to go." Ahioka looked up from her bowl, her dark eyes softening just a little. Lozan's shoulders eased. Even Naira's expression shifted, the hardness in her gaze fading into something more like understanding. "You work," Naira said quietly. "You stay, but no lies." Caleb nodded. "No lies." For the first time in years, the air around him didn't feel like judgment. The women went back to their work, and the sun sank behind the ridge, painting the canyon in firelight. Caleb watched the sky turn gold to crimson, then dark, realizing he hadn't thought about leaving once all day. By morning, the smell of smoke and beans still clung to the air. Naira stood near the fire, sharpening her knife with slow, even strokes. When Caleb approached, she lifted her eyes to meet his. "Food's almost gone," she said. "No more meat. Winter comes soon." Caleb nodded. "Then we hunt." Her brow lifted, half challenge, half surprise. After a moment, she gave a short nod. "You come. Lozen, Tiva too." They moved through the narrow canyon trail as the sun climbed, the red cliffs glowing like fire. Caleb carried his old rifle across his shoulder, while Lozen had a bow, and Tiva trailed behind with a small bundle of rope. The air smelled of dust and dry sage. He found the first sign of life tracks near the wash where a stream once ran. He crouched, pressing a hand to the dirt. "Deer," he murmured. "Moving east?" Naira studied the prints, then looked at him. "You sure?" "Been hunting longer than I've been breathing," he said. They followed the trail through a thicket of mesquite. A hawk screamed overhead, circling wide. When the deer finally appeared a small doe grazing in the shade, Caleb raised his rifle slowly. The weight of the gun felt like memory. He steadied his breath and fired. The shot cracked through the still air. The doe fell with a soft thud. Tiva flinched, clutching her hands together. Lozen moved forward first, knife ready. Caleb followed, kneeling beside the animal. "Easy, girl," he whispered, touching its neck before the light faded from its eyes. Naira crouched beside him. "Good shot," she said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes lingered on him longer than before. They worked together to dress the deer. Lozen's hands moved quick and sure. Tiva helped gather the meat, her face pale but determined. Caleb carried the heaviest load, his bad knee throbbing but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. When they returned, the others were waiting. Sahana built the fire higher, and Ahioka brought out salt and herbs. Soon the scent of roasting meat filled the canyon. For the first time, laughter broke, between them soft, uncertain, but real. As night fell, Caleb sat beside the fire, the flames reflecting in 5 pairs of dark eyes. He realized he no longer felt like a stranger. He had come seeking warmth for one night, but what he had found instead was purpose and the fragile beginning of belonging. By the next evening, the canyon had grown quieter, wrapped in the heavy stillness that came after good work and full bellies. The women moved about the fire, talking softly in their own tongue while Caleb repaired the axe handle with a strip of leather. The smell of roasted meat lingered in the air, mixed with sage and the faint sweetness of rain long gone. He had begun to notice the small things, the way Tiva hummed when she cooked, the way Sahana's laughter carried just enough to echo off the rock, the way Naira's eyes always seemed to find him first, measuring, weighing, deciding. For the first time in years, the ache in his chest didn't come from loneliness, but from something he didn't quite dare name. Then, late in the afternoon, Naira suddenly stilled. Her head turned sharply toward the ridge above the canyon. "Quiet," she whispered. Caleb followed her gaze. Against the setting sun, 3 silhouettes moved slowly along the ridge riders. Even at that distance, he could tell by their posture that they were armed. "Who are they?" he asked. Lozen's voice came low. "Raiders, traitors, maybe worse." The air thickened. The youngest, Tiva, dropped the pot she was carrying. The sound of clay shattering seemed to echo forever. Naira barked something in Apache, quick and sharp. The women moved fast, covering the fire with a metal pan, scattering the light, grabbing knives and bows. Caleb's hand went to his revolver. It had been years since he'd drawn it in anything but memory. His pulse began to drum in his ears. "They seen the smoke?" "Maybe," Naira said. "If they do, they come." He looked up again. At the ridge, the riders had stopped. One of them pointed toward the canyon mouth. The sight lit something old inside him, not fear, exactly, but the cold readiness that soldiers carry long after the war is over. He turned to the women. If they come down, I'll stand. Naira's eyes narrowed, searching his face for a lie. After a long moment, she handed him a second rifle, rusted, but loaded. Then stand true. They spent the rest of the day in uneasy silence. Sahana gathered the children's blankets, even though there were none to tuck in. Lozen set traps near the canyon entrance. Ahilka whispered prayers over a bundle of sage, her lips moving too quietly for him to hear. When darkness came, they built the fire small, hidden between stones. The canyon turned to shadow and silence, save for the crackle of the hidden coals. Caleb sat with his back against the wall, rifle laid across his knees. His leg ached, but he stayed awake, eyes fixed on the rim above. The women slept close together, their breathing soft, uneven. The wind carried faint sounds, hoofbeats, maybe, or just ghosts of them. He couldn't tell. He kept watch anyway, the barrel of the gun cold under his hand. Around midnight, Naira stirred and crawled closer to where he, Saturday. Her face glowed dimly in the dying firelight. You not sleep? He shook his head. Can't. She studied him for a moment, then said quietly, You could have left today. You stay. Why? Caleb hesitated, the truth rising before he could stop it. Because I've run long enough, he said. And I've got no one left but the ones right here. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire hissed softly. Then Naira nodded once, her gaze steady. Good, she said simply, and went back to lie beside the others. He sat alone after that, the stars wheeling slowly above the canyon. For the first time in years, he wasn't moving towards something or away from it. He was standing still, ready, awake, and not alone. And when the faint cry of a coyote rose from the ridge, he smiled to himself. It wasn't fear he felt anymore. It was belonging waiting to be tested. Dawn crept over the canyon slow and red, spilling through the gaps in the rocks like blood through cracked earth. Caleb hadn't slept, his back pressed against the stone wall, the rifle cold in his hands. The fire had burned down to embers, hidden under a cover of ash. The women stirred quietly, their faces still drawn with worry. Naira rose first, her hair loose and dark against the pale morning. She scanned the ridge, eyes narrowed. They still there, she said. Caleb followed her gaze. 3 riders stood on the rim above, small against the rising sun, their shapes sharp as cuts on the sky. One leaned forward in the saddle, pointing down into the canyon. Sahana cursed under her breath. They come now. Caleb's chest tightened, not with fear, but with something like duty. He pushed himself up, wincing as his bad leg flared with pain. Get behind the rocks, he said. No fires, no sound. The women obeyed without question this time. Naira and Lozen gathered the bows and knives. Tiva clung to Sahana's sleeve, her lips trembling. Ahilka whispered quick prayers in Apache, tracing symbols in the dust. Caleb moved to the narrow opening of the canyon, the only path in or out. From there, he could see the trail twisting up toward the ridge. He set his rifle against the rock, loaded 2 extra rounds, and waited. The sound came first, hoofbeats on stone, steady, cruel, then voices. The riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, faces shadowed under wide hats. They were traders, maybe, or thieves' men who survived by taking what others had built. One of them called out, We saw smoke. Come out, friend. We ain't here for fighting. Caleb didn't move. Another voice laughed. Maybe he's got women down there. Smelled cooking meat too. Caleb's hands tightened on the rifle. The old fury stirred inside him, the kind he thought he'd buried with his uniform. Keep riding, he shouted. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. Ain't nothing here for you. A pause, then laughter. Oh, we'll see about that. They urged their horses forward a few paces. The sound of hooves clattered off the stone. One reached for his gun. Caleb raised the rifle, aimed high, and fired. The shot split the canyon in 2. The echo rolled up the cliffs, louder than thunder. Birds burst from their nests, wings slicing through the morning light. The riders' horses reared, snorting. Next one goes through your hat, Caleb said. His voice was steady, calm as stone. For a long moment, no one moved. The men stared down into the canyon, trying to see where he stood, but all they saw was shadow and the faint glint of steel. Finally, one spat into the dirt. Ain't worth it, he muttered. Let's go. They turned their horses and rode off, the sound fading until it was only wind again. Caleb lowered the rifle slowly, his shoulders sagging. His legs shook beneath him, but he stood his ground until the last echo died. Behind him, Naira stepped forward from behind a boulder. You stand, she said quietly. He turned to face her. Sweat and dust streaked her face, but her eyes were bright, alive. I said I would, he replied. Sahana came next, leading Tiva by the hand. They gone? For now. Ahioka approached with calm steps, holding out a small cloth. You bleed, she said, pointing to a scrape on his arm. Caleb hadn't noticed it, a shallow cut from the rock. She wrapped it gently, her hands sure. The fire was lit again once the sun rose high. They sat in a loose circle, silent at first. Then Lozen broke the quiet. You shoot to scare, not to kill. Caleb nodded. Killing's easy. Living after ain't. Naira studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly the first time he'd seen it. Maybe you stay, she said. Maybe you belong. He looked around the circle, 5 women, once strangers, now family bound by survival. The canyon no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like something else beginning. That night, when the stars came out and the wind softened, they built the fire higher than before. No one spoke of leaving. Caleb sat with them, the rifle laid aside, the flames painting light across his face. The shot still echoed somewhere deep in the rocks, but now it carried a different sound, not of warning, but of promise. The canyon had a different sound after the gunshot. Silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, alive, filled with the echo of what had just happened and the quiet understanding that something had changed. Caleb woke with the dawn. The fire burned low and the smell of smoke still hanging in the cold air. His body ached, but not from fear. It was the kind of ache that came from doing something that mattered. For the first time in years, he'd stood for something and someone other than himself. When he stepped outside the lean-to, the light was soft, gold spilling down from the ridge. The wind carried the faint call of a hawk and the faraway murmur of the desert waking. The women were already up. Naira stood near the stream, her hair wet and braided back tight. Lozen was cleaning the knives. Sahana patched one of the hide blankets. Ahioka stirred the ashes back into flame, and Tiva knelt by the water, her reflection rippling beside her. None of them spoke at first, but he felt their eyes following him as he limped toward the fire. You didn't have to stand last night, Naira said finally. Caleb looked at her, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. Yes, I did. She tilted her head, studying him. You could have left when sun went down. Many men do. He smiled faintly. I've been running half my life. Didn't see much worth running toward. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she passed him a tin cup of coffee, bitter, thin, but hot. It was more than enough. The day stretched out calm and bright. They all worked together as if they had done it for years. Sahana washed clothes by the stream, beating them against stones while Tiva hummed a tune that sounded older than the land itself. Ahioka mixed herbs, hanging bundles of sage to dry on a rope tied between 2 rocks. Lozen mended the straps of his saddle, her skilled hands moving like she was weaving more than leather maybe trust. Caleb repaired the fence that guarded the small corral they'd built for a pair of half-wild burros. His legs still throbbed, but each swing of the hammer, each knot he tied, felt like a claim staked into the world. Near noon, he caught Tiva watching him again. She pretended to look away, though her cheeks flushed in the sunday. He didn't say anything, only tipped his hat, and she laughed softly, a sound like the wind turning warm. Later, while he rested near the fire, Lozen sat beside him, sharpening one of the knives she'd just cleaned. You know why we stay here? She asked. I can guess. She nodded. Out there, widows are bad luck. Tribe says we bring death. White men call us trouble. Here, only Canyon listen. Canyon don't judge. He watched the way her hands moved, the strength behind her calm voice. Then the Canyon's got better sense than most men I've met. She smiled faintly but didn't look up. You different, she said. You don't take, you give back. Before he could answer, Naira called across the fire, her voice low but steady. Come eat. They sat in a circle as the sun began to dip, 5 women and 1 man sharing bread and roasted corn. The air was soft, the kind that made the heart remember things it had tried to forget. After the meal, the conversation fell quiet. Only the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind through sagebrush filled the space between them. Then Ahyoka spoke, her tone slow, deliberate. "We cannot live alone forever," she said. "We work, we hide, but winter comes. And one day, maybe raiders come again." She looked across at Caleb, her eyes calm but knowing. "You fight, you protect, you stay." Caleb set his bowl down. The words pressed into him heavier than the rifle he'd carried. Lozen looked up next. "Not as stranger, as part of us." Sahana nodded. "We need man for more than gun. We need hands, heart, voice." Tiva's whisper came last. "We need family." The firelight caught their faces strong, scarred, beautiful in ways the world would never name. Caleb's throat tightened. He looked at each of them, one by one, and saw not charity or desire but courage, the same kind he'd lost years ago when he'd buried his wife and child. "I came here to find sleep," he said quietly. "But you gave me something else. You gave me reason." Naira leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Then stay. Not as guest, not as pity. Stay because you want." The canyon fell silent again. Even the wind paused, waiting. Caleb stared into the fire. For so long he'd carried the idea that love or belonging was something finished, buried in frozen Kansas soil. But looking at these 5 women, their faces lit by flame and resolve, he felt the impossible stir a life he hadn't dared to imagine. He lifted his eyes to Naira's. "If you'll have me," he said, voice low, steady, "I'll stay. Not for tonight, for good." Tiva let out a breath she'd been holding. Lozen smiled, small but real. Sahana wiped her hands on her skirt, blinking fast. Ahyoka murmured a prayer that sounded like gratitude. Naira didn't speak. She simply reached across the fire and placed her hand over his, firm, warm, certain. The night deepened around them. Above, the stars spilled across the dark like silver dust. The canyon no longer felt like exile. It felt like home, a rough, imperfect, sacred place where broken souls could begin again. And for the first time in years, Caleb Morton stopped wondering where he belonged. He already knew. The first cold wind came down from the mountains a week later. It carried with it a whisper of snow and the smell of distant rain, sharp enough to make the horses restless. Caleb woke early that morning, frost already forming along the rocks. The canyon, once golden and alive, now lay silent beneath a pale gray sky. The women were moving quietly through the camp, wrapping their shoulders in shawls, their breath turning to mist. Naira stirred the coals with a stick until the fire came alive again, and the light caught the tired calm of her face. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "Winter comes fast here. No place to hide from it." Caleb nodded, rubbing his stiff knee. "Then we'd better start getting ready." From that day on, they worked from dawn to dusk. The canyon filled with sound again, axes splitting wood, voices calling across the rocks, the steady crackle of fire as they smoked meat and dried corn. Sahana built racks for the venison Caleb and Lozen had hunted. Ahyoka hung bundles of sage, wild mint, and yarrow to dry along the stone wall. Naira oversaw everything, quick to scold, quicker to work. Tiva helped wherever she could, her small hands never still. She fed the fire, carried water, mended clothes, until her fingers bled. Each night, when the wind howled through the narrow pass, she slept close to the others, her body trembling until warmth found her again. Caleb found himself watching them more than he meant to the strength in their quiet, the rhythm of their lives. They no longer felt like strangers. Each one had a place, a task, a thread in the fabric of something new. He built a small shelter from mesquite and cedar poles, patching the roof with hides. It wasn't much, but it was solid. Lozen helped him drive the nails, her arms steady and strong. She rarely spoke, but once, as they worked side by side, she said, "When we build with hands, the heart remembers." He didn't know what to say to that, but he carried the words with him the rest of the day. As the first frost deepened, he began to teach them small tricks he'd learned on the plains. How to stack wood so it dried faster, how to seal cracks in the shelter with mud and grass, how to build a smokeless fire. The women listened carefully, repeating each step until they mastered it. At night, They gathered around the fire in the new shelter. The smoke curled toward the ceiling, leaving thin black lines like a story being written above them. They spoke more freely now. Naira asked about Kansas, about the fields, the winters there. Caleb told them of wheat waving gold beneath a storm sky, of a river that froze hard enough for wagons to cross, of a little boy who once tried to catch snowflakes on his tongue. Tiva smiled softly. You had son. He nodded. Had. Silence fell. Ahioka reached across the fire and touched his arm. You have family again, she said simply. He looked at her, unsure if she meant it as comfort or truth. But the words settled deep in him, warm as the firelight. Outside, the wind rose, sweeping through the canyon like a voice. The fire hissed and spat. That night, he dreamed for the first time in years not of graves or fever, but of the sound of laughter echoing against canyon walls. The days that followed blurred together. Snow came early, thin at first, then thicker. They worked harder, storing what they could. The canyon floor turned white, and every morning the air bit their skin like glass. One evening, while Caleb was mending the corral fence, Tiva brought him a blanket she had stitched from scraps of hide. For your leg, she said shyly. Cold make it worse. He took it, feeling the rough seams beneath his fingers. You made this? She nodded. We all did. Peace from everyone. He wrapped it around his knee, warmth spreading fast. Thank you, he said quietly. That night, when they ate stew together, he noticed that no one kept distance anymore. The circle had closed small, strong, complete. Lozen laughed at something Sahana said in Apache, her voice light, almost playful. Ahioka sang under her breath while stirring the pot. Tiva leaned against Naira's shoulder, half asleep. Caleb sat back, listening to them. The crackle of fire, the whisper of the wind outside. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of surviving another day. He felt the peace of belonging to one. When the fire dimmed, he rose to add more wood. Naira caught his hand before he could. Sit, she said. You worked enough. He smiled faintly. You're the only person ever told me that. Her eyes softened. Then maybe you had wrong people before. The firelight danced between them, flickering gold over skin and shadow. She didn't move her hand away, and he didn't pull his back. Outside, snow kept falling over the canyon, quiet, endless, kind. And inside that fragile shelter, 6 souls warmed themselves against the winter, bound not by blood or law, but by the simple grace of survival shared. When spring light first brushed the canyon walls, the world looked almost new. The snow melted into thin silver streams that wound between the rocks, and green shoots pushed through the cracks where only dust had lived before. Caleb stood at the mouth of the canyon, rifle in hand, scanning the ridge. He'd been up since dawn, watching the horizon. For days, the women had felt it in their bones, something shifting, something coming. And they were right. 3 riders appeared again, the same men from before, moving slow along the ridge as if testing courage. This time they didn't shout. They studied the smoke rising from the canyon, the new fence around the corral, the steady trails of work that said this place was no longer a hiding hole but a home. Naira stepped beside Caleb, her bow slung across her shoulder. You think they come? He shook his head. Not today. Lozen joined them, knife at her belt, calm as ever. They see what we built, she said. Men like that don't fight walls, they fight weakness. The riders watched for a while longer, then turned their horses toward the desert, dust rising behind them like ghosts fading back into the earth. No one cheered. No one needed to. When the echo of hoofbeats died, Caleb exhaled slowly. The fear that had once ruled this canyon was gone. What filled the space now was strength, quiet, steady, shared. He turned to the women. Naira's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no question between them. They returned to camp together. Ahioka was tending the fire, Sahana grinding corn with a rhythm that sounded like music. Tiva laughed softly as one of the burros tried to steal her blanket. Caleb watched them all, the life they'd built out of ruin, and felt something in his chest unclench. When Naira came to stand beside him again, she said, almost smiling, "This our home now." He nodded. Ours. The wind swept through the canyon, warm and bright, carrying with it the scent of sage and the faint promise of rain. And in that moment, Beneath the open sky, they weren't outcasts or survivors anymore, they were family. By summer, the canyon no longer looked like the place he'd stumbled into months ago. The smoke from the fires rose clean, the fences stood firm, and laughter had found its way into every corner. Caleb sat on the porch they'd built together from rough cedar planks. His legs still ached, but the pain no longer ruled him. Across the yard, Naira was hanging blankets in the Sunday. Lozen taught Tiva how to mend leather, while Sahana hummed by the stream. Ahyoka stirred a pot of stew, her voice floating with the wind soft, sure, alive. It felt like a dream he hadn't dared to ask for. He looked around, remembering how he'd once come here, only to rest for a night, a broken man with nowhere left to go. Now the canyon was full of life, of shared work, of small joys stitched together by survival and trust. That evening, when the sun sank low and turned the cliffs to fire, Naira came to sit beside him. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore." She smiled faintly. "Good. We need you." Caleb Morton. He took her hand, rough from work yet warm as the setting Sunday. "No," he said softly, "we need each other." The wind stirred the sagebrush. The world beyond the canyon could have its noise and cruelty. Here, there was peace fragile, earned, and real. And when the stars came out that night, Caleb finally understood. He hadn't been saved by mercy or luck, but by love born of hardship, the kind that turned exile into home. If you've stayed with the story until this very moment, thank you. Truly. Stories like The Rancher and the Five Apache Widows aren't just about love or survival in the Wild West. They're about finding each other and ourselves in the middle of loss and silence. If you love the timeless feel of the frontier, the warmth hidden beneath dust and struggle, then subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Every week, you'll discover new tales of men who protect with quiet strength, and women who dare to love when the world has already turned its back on them. Hit subscribe so you never miss the next story. Turn on the notification bell, because the next sunset might bring a story your heart has been waiting for. Thank you for riding with us. We'll meet again beneath the golden light of the next western dusk.